Good morning to everyone and welcome to our presentation Summer Pastures in the Ligurian Apennines, Italy, exploring historical ecology through environmental archaeology sources. This presentation has been produced by Brunailde Menozzi, Chiara Molinari, Carlo Montanari, Diego Moreno, Alessandro Panetta, Valentina Pescini, Anna Maria Stagno, members of the CIR LASA, Laboratorio di Archeologia e Storia Ambientale at the University of Genoa, and by myself, Roberta CEVASCO, from the University of Gastronomic Sciences at Pollenzo, and also member of CIR LASA. So, the environmental archaeology sources employed in this presentation derive from different field research campaigns in the Ligurian Apennines during a long-term project devoted to the wetland sites of Liguria and conducted by the Laboratory of Environmental Archaeology and History of the University of Genoa. Information about the historical ecology of the sites in question have been extracted from fieldwork on rural archaeology and documentary and historical cartographic sources at the topographical scale of the individual slope or sub-basin that supplies the studied sediment. In yellow are indicated the transhumance summer quarters that are called in dialect Alpi in the main Apennines watershed. These Alpi were largely located in medieval and post-medieval age in commonlands and hosted both transhumant and local herds. The sites sampled for the pollen analysis discussed here are indicated in bold, Lago della Nava and Lago di Rezzo, and were watering points for livestock until the 1970s. Lago della Nava is still located in an area of commonland. Lago di Rezzo is located in a kinship commonland. The comparison between the present situation and historical photographs show the recent change in the composition of the herbaceous species in the ancient grasslands and the disappearance of the historical watering point. These changes are due to the abandonment in the 1970s of the water system management and to the abandonment of grazing cattle that trampled the bottom of the pond, making it waterproof, as documented by the last users. As shown in this postcard, in 1958, the grazing activities were due mainly to the local cattle breed called Cabannina, but the land use pattern and the composition of these grasslands largely depended on a previous system based on sheep and goats transhumance that ended before the First World War. We will associate in the next slides this document to the pond sedimentary sequence sampled. The present meadow can be identified in this map, drawn for jurisdictional purposes by the feudal officer Marcantonio Fossa in 1715. The site is described as beni forestri, an outfield where the temporary zone roncare was allowed. So we can consider these meadows to have the ecologies of ancient grassland, as shown by cartography, because the herbaceous community present a continuity of more than 300 years. We can follow the historical ecology of these grasslands in the previous centuries, thanks to the pollen record sampled from the pond. The palynological results suggest a long-lasting land use continuity since Roman times. In fact, the whole pollen sequence records an open landscape characterized by herbs and shrubs typical of grazed meadows and a sparse tree cover. Furthermore, the discontinuous trend of microcharcoal concentrations suggests an irregular use of controlled fires for temporary agricultural practices or pastoral fire regime. In yellow are indicated the taxa typically associated with meadows and agricultural fields that, despite the low percentages, might be connected to the presence of transhumance roots in the area. According to Northern European palynological literature, the pollen diagram shows some possible indicator taxa of meadows and agricultural fields connected to transhumance activities. Tentatively, we can identify different phases of grazing activities through the attributed interpolated chronology and the dynamics of these taxa. See the main peaks of taxa presence. This graph shows the main peaks in the palynological richness and microcharcoals corresponding to the high medieval age and post-medieval age. These peaks are possibly related to changes in the organization and management of summer pastures and livestock composition. The post-medieval peaks in microcharcoals and palynological richness can be related to a phase of intensification of settlement in this area of the Apennines, in which seasonal settlement became permanent in the direction of the development of the agrarian regime. The post-medieval peaks in microcharcoals and palynological richness can be related to important changes in the management of grassland resources and in rural settlements. Casone is a seasonal settlement in which shepherds live with livestock during the summer months. The place name Casone del Giazzo is interesting because the phase 1 of the building is dated 1683 AD, and thus we can refer this phase to a change from a jas or giazzo, a sheep shelter walled by dry stone, to a casone, intended for high storing and bovine breeding. The other site is the Lago di Rezzo. So the cored site of Lago di Rezzo is located at the bottom of a mountain slope hosting a kinship commonland documented since the 15th century. This institution is still living. The site documents an interesting shift in 4 phases from the medieval pastoral regime to the present agrarian regime. This synthetic palynological diagram shows interesting environmental indicator of transhumance in yellow. The site is still under investigation and the sediments could be deeper. The main peak in microcharcoals around 1600 AD corresponds to the minimum in tree cover and is associated with the first appearance of zea maize or corn, possibly an evidence of a first development of permanent crops in the new agrarian regime. This slide shows a reconstructive hypothesis of 4 identifiable medieval and post-medieval phases based on the variations of the herbaceous composition, coprophilous fungi and microcharcoals, The transhumance indicators are highlighted in bold. It is possible to note the transition from a full pastoral regime to an agrarian regime during the 19th century, with permanent fields and improved meadows, and the spread of fodder species such as Onobrichis, proved by documentary and oral sources. This pollen diagram does not register the expansion of Onobrichis, and it is interesting to note that presently the local geographical name of this type of field meadows is Lupinella. That is the 19th century Italian name of Onobrichis vicifolia, or sunfoin. The dates in the diagram are reconstructed based on an interpolation between the two radiocarbon dates and the historical topographical documentation. And finally, we can say, to open the discussion, that the sedimentary sources contrasted with other historical ecology sources discussed in this presentation allow a better identification of different pollen taxa, for example, Quercus cherris and Onobrichis vicifolia, allow to detect more detailed variations in vegetation dynamics corresponding to different phases in management land use, for example, grasslands and wood meadow pastures, and allow to discuss the meaning of indicator species, for example, of transhumant practices, shifting from a broad to a local context. The studied sites, compared with the results of other cored sites in northwestern Apennines, such as Prato Spilla and Monterlone, allow also to note an important variation during the High Medieval Age in the organization and composition of the upland pastures, an important discontinuity with the Roman Age transhumance organization. This result contrasts with the interpretations based only on documentary evidence that for this area of Apennines date the reactivation of transhumance movements to the 12th-13th century. And finally, a discontinuity in the transhumance practices during the pastoral regime. For example, we have seen different phases and peaks discussed in the presentation. So, the research development requires more detailed chronology, more radioisotopic datations, high definition in sampling pollen, and more information on the local ecologies of indicator species. Thank you for your attention and see you soon at the conference for the discussion.